at the Washington Post. So, Brian, explain what Fed chairman just said this morning in this conference there in Arlington.
Well, I got 3 words for you to start out, Jose, and good morning, good afternoon, whatever, is global trade war. And that is the new challenge that Jerome Powell and the Federal Reserve now face. Before, what we talked about was inflation, the high cost of everything, homes, mortgages, cars, whatever, caught up in the COVID supply chain crunch that we had a couple of years ago. Prices still too darn high. I will filter myself as it's a family show. And now, all of a sudden, the Federal Reserve is finding itself trying to fight this tariff, this trade war, which I don't want to say came out of the blue, but certainly is a lot worse than people expected. I'm not sure anybody on Wall Street that we have talked to here on CNBC expected the president to do exactly what he did. Most people said, well, you know what, he's just hubris. He's going to say this, but ultimately we're not going to get the worst. Well, guess what? We got the worst and then some. Now, to your point, Jose, China's responding. What did Jay Powell say today, the Fed chair? Well, number one, he said, I'm not going to respond to what the president did because the Federal Reserve is not supposed to respond to elected officials. But if you read between the lines, and I can assure you there is no love lost between these two men, Jay Powell and President Trump. President Trump wants lower interest rates, lower mortgages, and lower inflation. He has openly called for the Federal Reserve to cut rates. The Federal Reserve, though, now is believing that if tariffs are enacted, as we know that they will be, prices are likely to rise. That's inflation, and the Federal Reserve does not cut rates in inflation. If anything, it might keep rates steady or perhaps even raise them. So this is a global conundrum that, as we're seeing from the charts and the numbers today, Wall Street is caught in the middle of, and it's kind of a sell first, ask questions later theory.
Garrett, meanwhile, going back to that mixed message that we were talking about by the president. On the one hand, he says tariffs give the U.S. the power to negotiate. But then this morning saying his policies will never change. What are you hearing out of the White House as far as, is there a specific stick-to message, or is this part of the negotiating tactic to have mixed messages?
Yeah, I think mixed messages is putting it mildly, Jose. You have the White House and the president oftentimes at loggerheads here over what exactly is going on. And I think there are really 2 reasons for that. The first is that the justification for these tariffs and the fact that the president can impose them unilaterally is that he's declared a national emergency here. He's saying to the country essentially that this is such a big deal. I have to address it unilaterally in this moment quite quickly with emergency economic powers. That argument does not lend itself so well to then having, 60-plus individual negotiations about trade deals with different countries. And so what you're seeing is, I think, White House officials, people who draw a salary from the federal government who aren't Donald Trump, trying to stick by that message that this is a fundamental reordering of the U.S. economy. It's an emergency. It's got to be done this way. And you might just have to kind of wait out some of the pain, contrasted with the president's message, which is art of the deal. I'm out here talking to foreign leaders. We're open for calls. Come on in and we'll see what deals we can strike for the American people. It's consistent with the sort of inconsistency with which they've approached tariffs going back to the campaign. Donald Trump sees these tariffs as a solution to any variety of problems, just depending on how he applies it and sometimes how he chooses to talk about it from moment to moment.
Catherine, I was just wondering, the president continues to insist that the country is going to boom. We're seeing what the market's saying, and it's been already 48 hours saying. How long will Americans deal with and put up with that disconnect?
The problem here is not only that tariffs raise prices, they also slow growth. That's how you get the dreaded S word, stagflation, that you get higher prices, slower growth, potentially layoffs, potentially a recession, which is the worst of all possible outcomes, not only because those forces in and of themselves are very painful. Nobody likes higher inflation. Nobody likes recession, layoffs, slowdown, et cetera, but also because there are not a lot of great tools that will simultaneously deal with both problems. So as we heard earlier, the Federal Reserve may well decide it's not a good time to continue cutting rates. They've been on pause for a while, but it's especially a bad time if, in fact, prices continue to rise. If these tariffs not only have a one-time lead to a one-time increase in prices, but feed into trend inflation, that basically people start to anticipate higher prices, and so they set prices higher, and it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. The remedy that the Federal Reserve would take to deal with that issue is raising rates. But if we also have a recession, if we also have mass layoffs, if we have a slowdown, the remedy for that from the Federal Reserve would be cutting rates. So these objectives are obviously at odds. And so not only has Trump forced us into this very difficult position where we end up with basically all of the worst economic outcomes on various dimensions that you can imagine, but it'll be really hard to get ourselves out of it, particularly if there is no end game to this trade war, as it really sounds like there isn't.
Yeah, and Jenny, you advised Vice President Harris and Pence, not Vance, our apologies for that, the ex-vice president Pence criticize in a social media post this trade war, these new tariffs, et cetera. What do you see as far as how the United States and China have been dealing with this new trade war?
Well, I think this is a really important point because this is the third time in the second Trump administration China's been hit with tariffs. Those first two times, China responded in a more limited way. It waited until tariffs went into effect. It was essentially preserving room for negotiation. This time, Beijing seems to be making clear they don't want to be pushed around. Their response is much larger. Their response came before U.S. tariffs have hit, even though they're leaving a little bit of room by not implementing until after April 9th. But still, I think what this is indicating is that we are moving closer to a full-scale trade war where there's likely to be a tit for tat, just like what we saw in the first Trump administration. The difference here is we're starting at much higher tariff rates when we launch into that full-scale trade war.
And Brian, we have real-world impact of the trade war today. I mean, Nintendo just announced that their new Switch 2 would be delayed. They were expecting to start orders in this month, and then I think delivery in the summer. But what does this tell us?
Well, it's one example, right, Jose, of what exactly could happen. So the Nintendo Switch, if you have kids out there, teenagers, maybe you play it yourself. The video game device that we're showing could have a delay. We'll see the launch date right now is supposed to be unchanged. But it's just one example of what we just talked about, right, about what might happen with all this. I'm going to flip the script, though, a little bit because I'd love to hear everybody's views. The easy aspect is to say that tariffs are inflationary. They raise the price because tariffs act as a tax on incoming goods. There is another school of thought out there, which is tariffs could ultimately be deflationary, meaning prices come down. I'll tell you why. Yes, they add to the cost of a good, right? Sofa comes in, supposed to be $3,000, now it's $3,400, whatever the number might be. If demand falls because of that $3,400 price, we know prices have already come way up over the last 4 years. Demand falls, the producer has to cut their price to meet demand. That could be a deflationary environment. And while lower prices sound nice, oh, I want to pay less, I don't want to pay more, that's a negative outcome generally for the American economy and world economy, because when prices are falling, it means you have stagnating or collapsing demand. And that by itself is a bad thing. Here's the tough reality. Okay, you want the reality? Here it is that rents are too darn high, inflation was too darn high, auto costs are too darn high, all these things. We want prices to come down. But is recession the way to do it? Is this the way to... Everybody agreed 6 months ago the prices were too high. All right? Well, the president said he's going to do something about it. But is crashing the economy potentially the way to bring prices down? That's what Wall Street is grappling with right now.
Yeah, and I mean, the other question would be whether this tariff war would have that impact on our economy and in short terms. And I know, Catherine, you've been tracking the impact of the Trump administration on food prices. What do numbers say there?
It's a little bit early at this point to see the effect of these tariffs. And for a lot of goods, we saw businesses try to stockpile things early. So whether, appliances, cars, furniture, durable goods, things that are not perishable. Food is a lot harder, right? You can't stock up on avocados for the next 6 months in case Trump decides to tariff Mexican avocados because they'll go bad. So we have at the Washington Post with my colleagues Yo-Yo Joe and Philip Bump, we have put together this food tracker using data from a consumer research firm called Numerator that tracks in close to real time what happens to prices of common household grocery purchases. They're bundled into a barbecue, you know, the kinds of things you'd have at a barbecue, how much is like hamburger meat, buns, napkins, etc. We also have it for a BLT. Trump talked a lot during the campaign about how mad he was that BLTs had gotten more expensive under Joe Biden. And we will be updating that every week because we have close to real-time data that will show us what's happening to these food items. And to be clear, tariffs are not the only thing that might affect the price of the food you buy, whether we're talking about produce from Mexico, dairy from Canada, lots of other food that comes over from Europe and Latin America. A lot of places in Latin America send us fresh produce as well, lots of berries, for example. We will see some of that. There are also other factors here. Coffee prices have been surging because of disruptions in markets, partly related to climate change. Bird flu, of course, has also increased the price of eggs. That's not entirely Donald Trump's fault, even if I don't love the way that he's handled that epidemic. But we will be tracking this. Donald Trump was on the campaign trail promising to decrease prices. As we have heard, outright decreases in prices through deflation is generally not something you want. It's usually a sign of an economy that's very sick. We saw it during the Great Depression. But at the very least, I'm sure consumers would love to not see prices go up. And given what Trump has been doing, that seems very likely to contribute to higher prices at the grocery store.